Hi everyone, it's the second Sunday of Lent and I'm going to share my sermon for the day. Lent is a bit like going camping or going hiking. When we go out into the wild, we don't want to take too much with us. We want to pack lightly and live simply. We don't want all the stuff that overwhelms us when we're at home or when we're at work. We want to break from that. We want to make space so that we can appreciate the beauty of the wild. During Lent, we're on the way to Easter with Jesus. We might live a bit more simply, travel more lightly so that we can focus on that journey. And if we've given up something nice like red meat or coffee or alcohol, noticing the lack might lead us to pray or lead us to remember our sacred stories or to read them in the scripture. Noticing the lack might lead us to appreciate what we have, be thankful for it, and remember the situation of others in the world who are experiencing difficulty. And it might lead us to act in solidarity with those people. The scriptures for today are from Paul's letter to the Philippians, chapter 3, verse 17 to chapter 4, verse 1. And then the gospel reading is from Luke 13, 31 to 35. So feel free to pause the video, have a read of those, and then start it up again. So we're traveling with Jesus on the way to Easter, which means that we're heading toward the cross and his execution. We're preparing to face the cross again, but in Paul's letter to the ancient Christians in Greece, we heard him say that some people don't want to face the cross. In the part of the ancient world where the Jewish and Christian scriptures originated, the concept of honor and shame was very important, just as they are in many cultures now. In ancient Greek society and later on in Roman society, it was important to preserve the honor of your family and your household by following social norms and by being strong and successful and wealthy, especially if you're a man, especially if you were a man who was a leader in your household. And you had to do that by dominating others and not letting others dominate you or dominate your household. It was important to be a big, strong, rich man and to have one who would look out for you. If you had to depend on another household for work, so if you had to depend on another man's household for work or for favors or protection, that was not honorable. And by depending on a relationship with another stronger, richer man's household, you'd bring shame on yourself and on your own family. If you were struggling to get by, struggling to provide for your family or protect your family, that would bring shame on your family. So if you had a lot of honor, if you were rich and strong and powerful, if you were a man from an honorable family, you would not want to journey towards the cross with Jesus. You would not want to follow somebody who had been executed by the state, humiliated in such a shameful way as Jesus had. It would be considered very shameful for Jesus to have allowed his opponents to do this to him, and it would have been a source of shame for his family and for anybody who associated themselves with him. People who had heard the gospel and knew the story would have seen Christians as shameful because of Jesus' death. So if you were big and strong and powerful, especially if you were the father of an important household, you would not want to journey towards the cross with Christ. But if you were struggling to get by, having to ask for favors from the rich and powerful, if you had no honor to lose, this might not be such a barrier for you. This was somebody who knew your experience of being shamed by the honorable. In his letter to the Christians in the Greek city of Philippi, Paul is saying that while the church might be made up of people who have been humiliated and shamed and broken, as they experience something like Christ's humiliation in his death, they're also being welcomed as full members in a great and honourable cosmic household, Christ's heavenly household. They're being welcomed into a hidden world in the church where they are all honoured. Among us, it should not be the rich and powerful and strong and masculine who are honoured, but everyone. In fact, those of us who are used to being honoured, we need to learn how to give up some of our own honour as we learn to all serve each other mutually. I said earlier that things were like this in ancient societies, as though they're not like that in this Western society. For a long time in the Christian West, it seemed that the important thing was not honour and shame, but guilt and innocence. So even if the Prime Minister was caught driving over the speed limit, they would get fined just like anyone else. Their power or their wealth would not matter. But we don't have to look far to see that some folks in the West would like to return to honouring the rich and strong and powerful and proud and shaming the poor and the weak and the vulnerable, making them plead for mercy and praise the powerful for their generosity. We might be afraid about what that could mean for the world and for our society, but we need to be paying attention to what is going on around us in the world and in our society, but we need to not let those concerns take over our attention. Our attention needs to be on our journey with Jesus, following where he's leading us, following his example in the gospel reading. In the gospel reading, the Pharisees come to warn Jesus that the local ruler Herod is going to execute him. Who was Herod? He was part of a Jewish aristocratic house who had adapted themselves to Roman rule. And they were powerful, but they had maintained their power by submitting themselves to the Roman rulers. So there's some shame involved in that. They had been involved in rebuilding the Jewish temple, but also they had promoted a Greek and Roman vision of the good life rather than the Jewish vision of the good life that is described in the Torah. So he had a lot of influence at the temple, but some people had the view that he had led the Jewish faith off in the wrong direction. And who were the Pharisees? They were less involved in the temple. They were a movement that was more involved with the local synagogues and in local communities. They had a focus on instructing people in how to follow the Jewish vision of the good life, as described in the Torah. And they had a focus on helping ordinary people think about how they would follow the Torah in their households, in agriculture, in business, in everyday life. So in a lot of ways, they had a similar interest to Jesus. They had a lot of similar concerns, but they were also rivals and competitors for the same followers. When these members of the Pharisee movement come to Jesus, we can't be sure what their intention is. They might be genuinely concerned that he could be killed because they have common interests and they're often in conversation with each other. They've often shared meals. But they might also be trying to get him to retreat so that they don't have to compete with him for the hearts and minds of the common people. Either way, Jesus is not concerned. His focus isn't on worrying about the evil things that the people in power might do. His focus is on his ministry, preaching, healing, releasing people from evil. The violence and oppression of people in power is nothing new. It's what they've done to prophets in every generation, and it's what they do now. At any time, we might hear worrying things about what the powerful men of the world are doing. We shouldn't bury our heads in the sand and be naive. But we shouldn't allow worrying about them to stop us from our practices. We should keep on pursuing the good life that Jesus has demonstrated to us. We should continue on the way with Jesus.